50 years of massive inflation, and very few people know about it. Yes, there's the old quote attributed to Lenin that the best way to destroy the bourgeoisie or the middle class is to debauch the currency through the process of inflation, and that only one person in a million knows that it's happening. And the worst of this inflation that we've had is that it's been done to the world's reserve currency. Of course, a lot of countries have had massive hyperinflations in the last 50 years, mainly because they're not part of the club. They're third world or emerging market countries, and the people who run the system, they don't care about those countries because they keep lending to them through the IMF so that they can go there and extract wealth from the general public from those countries like Brazil, Argentina, and many others. But the same thing's going to happen in Western Europe, in the US. That's what they're doing now. They're indebting us up to here, and eventually they'll pull the plug. There'll be a massive collapse of everything, of the currency included, because it's not possible. Fiat currencies, they always go to zero, and the paper dollar will do the same. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about that today, even though I've already talked about it. And I'm going to look at some headlines, some stories today as well, and give you my opinion on them. Billy is back. Yes, the golf was nice yesterday. It was a beautiful day. My game was a little bit mixed. I played some good holes, but my driving and my putting weren't great. And if you don't putt and drive well, you're not going to score too well. But I'm not going to beat myself up. I hadn't played in 3 months. So, yes, let's go to one of my favorite quotes here from one of my favorite economists, bankers, if you can say that, Felix Sommery. He was an Austrian-Swiss banker in the beginning of the 1900s. He wrote his memoirs called The Raven of Zurich. And in that book, and I'll put a link to that book in the description below. It's a free PDF. I highly recommend it. And he says, inflation, on the other hand, can go on for years without its victims becoming conscious of the incredible way in which they have been swindled. I think since Nixon closed the gold window in 1971, because that's when the inflation started, August 15th, 1971, he said he was temporarily suspending the convertibility of the dollar into a fixed weight of gold, a fixed number of dollars for a fixed weight of gold. That's what the Bretton Woods gold exchange system was. It wasn't a pure gold standard because it was only the dollar that was linked to gold, and the other fiat currencies were linked to gold by being having a fixed exchange rate versus the dollar. So they're indirectly related to gold. So why did Nixon default? That was a default. No one ever says that was a default. Because it's not politically correct. The mainstream media calls it, if they ever talk about that, they call it Nixon closed the gold window. Well, because the United States abused that system, they started creating liabilities or printing dollars out of thin air. And the people that were in that system, mainly the biggest European nations, their treasuries, they knew that was happening, and they were demanding the gold, and the US was running out of gold. There were a few things they could have done to stop that. They could have raised interest rates, but presidents never like to raise interest rates. They could have reset the price of the dollar to gold, paper dollar, from $35 an ounce, maybe to $50. That would have stopped the flow of gold out of the US. And the third nuclear option, which they chose, unfortunately, was to basically close the gold window and make the dollar just nothing really, an IOU nothing, like John Exter calls it. And why have we had inflation since then? Well, because inflation is when you create currency out of thin air, not backed by a fixed weight of gold or silver, and there's no anchor. So central banks, governments, they can just expend the money supply. They can go on a debt spree. Yes, granted, the system had a lot of problems in the ensuing 9-10 years. The paper dollar almost collapsed. Volcker had to come in and save the system. But they've learned through time. They've learned through what's called management of perception economics, a lot of propaganda about the dollar, how it's as good as gold. They even call it as good as gold, or the king dollar. And yes, the dollar has had ups and downs versus all other fiat currencies. And it's generally actually gone down quite a bit versus the major fiat currencies. Like if you extrapolate the euro back, the Deutschmark, you can still calculate where the Deutschmark is. If you look at the Swiss franc, the dollar has been on a downward spiral versus the major currencies ever since. And we're still told that the dollar is king, but not even the other fiat currencies are king, because they are a derivative of the dollar. So yes, we've had massive inflation, and in a fiat currency system, the flip side of the currency is the national debt. That's what the currency is basically backed by. So that's why when politicians talk about paying off the national debt in a fiat currency system, you should know that they're basically not being really honest with you, because if you pay off the national debt in a fiat currency system, you get rid of all the money. And that's why, if you look at the national debt of the United States back in 1971, it was $398 billion. That's the national debt. That's not the deficit. Today, I think they run that every month as a deficit, $398 billion. It's crazy, isn't it? And now the national debt is over $28 trillion. But it's not only the government that has indebted itself. It's the general public, it's corporations, it's local government. And unfortunately, disinflation can't go on forever. There will be a tipping point where this system implodes completely, and all the prices that we see of especially paper assets, stocks, bonds, real estate, that's gonna completely evaporate, and we will see everything change. This so-called prosperity of the last 50 years, it's going to be uncovered, that people are going to see that there's nothing behind it, and people who are able to protect themselves with some precious metals, they're going to end up doing okay. They're not going to be wiped out. But a lot of people that think they're wealthy, a lot of people that have a lot of leverage, they're going to be wiped out. When that will happen, I don't know, but it's not sustainable, this system. So with that, let's look at some stories that I think are just symptoms of this inflation. And the other thing that's happened in the last 30 years or 20 years or so is that the central bankers and governments are desperate to keep this system going. So they've manipulated, they've killed capitalism. They've killed the price of money. And by that, I mean they've manipulated interest rates lower. And what that has done, that's forced the financial system, speculators, investors, consumers to leverage even more, because they're not getting returns on their savings. And with the leverage, of course, they've also used the leverage to manipulate everything. And you get a lot of accidents. We've had so many financial accidents in the last 25 years, starting with, let's say, Orange County, California. They went bust because of derivatives. LTCM went bust because of derivatives. .com bubble, not so many derivatives, but look at the '08 crisis. That was the subprime derivative crisis that almost brought down the whole banking system. And recently we've had this ARCGOS. ARCGOS, it's a hedge fund and or a family office, if you want to call it. So it says here, ARCGOS banks discuss cooperation to head off selling frenzy. So what was the problem here? It's derivatives and leverage again. They were doing what's called CFDs, which is basically betting on stocks, but on a derivative basis. They don't even own or sell the stock short. It's just betting on it with leverage. And as usual, it backfired. So that's another symptom of